What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I am reacting to Americans are wrong about War of Independence from Britain. Americans are wrong about War of Independence from Britain. I mean, the number of things that I've discovered later on that are wrong in this world about history, so many things, so many historical things, happenings, just wrong details, twisted. Starting to doubt so many other things, like the moon landing and so many other things. Let's get right into the video.
America becoming independent was more like if you got dumped by a high-maintenance girlfriend who cost you too much money. Whereas Americans think that we truly are the ones that got away. Revolution or rebellion. The original fight between Britain and America is a fascinating subject, not just in what actually happened, but in how it's depicted on both sides of the pond. In this video, we're debunking some of the myths that Americans believe about how the US came free from Britain, including why Britain cares way less than Americans think it does, and also why enlistees to the Revolutionary Army were required to have at least 2 good teeth. To Americans, the American Revolutionary War, as we call it in the US, is legendary. It's a huge part of the history of our country, obviously. And to be honest, I'd argue that most of us are more likely to know facts and figures about this particular period in American history than we would about more world-changing wars. But across the pond, the American War for Independence, as it's most often called in the UK, is not much. It's a blip on the radar, possibly, perhaps briefly mentioned in a child's schooling experience in a long list of other revolutions from British colonies, but it's certainly not focused on. And to Americans who are raised, in many ways, to think that this huge nation-altering moment in our country's history still plays in the minds of Brits today, who must be depressed every July 4th to think about the colonies they lost, we're a little bit surprised to learn that no one really cares. Or rather, Brits don't care at all, if they ever did. Surely someone did at some point in time, the British Crown, or the war wouldn't have happened, but the American memes that make it out to be that this is a sore spot in Britain's history are very mistaken. The reason is simple, really. The British Empire was vast, and American colonies were hardly the most important of them all. The Brits were far more concerned with other battles and making sure they kept much more lucrative colonies like India around this time. America becoming independent was more like if you got dumped by a high-maintenance girlfriend who cost you too much money. Whereas Americans think that we truly are the ones that got away. And when it comes to teaching the American War of Independence in schools, well, again, it makes much more sense to be a bigger part of Americans' learning. Because it's about us. It's on home soil. It's the founding of a nation. And it really starts much of our history as a country in terms of current governance. This helpfully means that we always get to it at the beginning of a school year when there's more time, as opposed to the end when you seem to run through 1900 to the 2000s in about 2 weeks. British history is so much longer, so much more filled with everything from queens and kings and medieval plots and an incredible amount of stuff. So much stuff. The American colonies are such a microscopic portion of this history, and so it doesn't make it into the British history standard schooling lessons. That's American misconception number 1. Now let's talk about American misconception number 2, which has to do with the support that the revolution, or rebellion as it was referred to by the British Crown, had within the colonies. We are taught in American rebellion, as it was referred to by the British Crown, had within the colonies. We are taught in America about all of the exciting figures who led the charge and what we know in the US as the Patriot. These are your Benjamin Franklins, your Paul Revere riding through town to tell people that the British patrols were coming. And by the way, he never actually shouted, "The British are coming." This is a myth. He actually said, "The regulars are coming out," and he was not riding and yelling. He was quietly trying to warn people. Anyway, it's easy as Americans to think that it was all of the colonists versus...
I don't think that is I don't think that's an important detail, to be honest with you. Like, he could as well be yelling, "The bastards are coming," or the fact is he warned them, so yeah.
To warn people. Anyway, it's easy as Americans to to think that it was all of the colonists versus the British Crown, but that's not the case. About 20% of the population in the colonies were loyalists, which meant that they took the side of the British Crown back on home soil. This could be for so many reasons. People with close business connections with Britain, obviously, as well as people who were just conservative by nature when it came to valuing order, and they were concerned that an independent new nation would be chaos. Fast forward to 2024, and honestly, they were probably onto something. And actually, over the course of the war, there was a larger percentage of the population, estimated to be around 20 to 45%, who were in the middle. They were known as the Trimmers, and they didn't fall completely on either side. This group often changed their loyalties based on who was winning at the time, which is honestly still how most of Orlando supports its sports teams to this day.
Oh my god.
The Patriots,
That is diabolical. That is diabolical. How can you change support for a club, for a football club? How? That is wrong. Jesus Christ. Don't bring that idea to the UK. I can't imagine someone supporting United when they're winning leagues and now the Liverpool are dominant. They switch teams to Liverpool. That is crazy. Jesus Christ. That's the only thing that's riled me up in this video so far. Like that's wrong.
Most of Orlando supports its sports
Jesus.
teams to this day. Anyway, the Patriots, the side fighting for American independence, had to really try and coax men into serving in the army and provide them with incentives to do so. Take a look at this poster asking for colonists to join the Patriots in George Washington. They're promised a bounty of $12, a full supply of goods and clothing, a daily allowance, and more. It says that you will return home with your pockets full of money and your head covered with laurels, i.e., meaning if you sign up with us, you are going to return having people think that you fought on the right side. The loyalists, or those on the side of the British Crown, also had to recruit, calling these people heroes and promising them 50 acres of land where you can retire when you finish fighting, as well as $5 and the clothing that you'll need. Also, fun fact, potential enlistees were required to have at least 2 good teeth. Not because they were going to be featured in any group photos, but because these teeth were needed to bite off the end of the paper cartridges used in the musket.
What?
Now, another misconception also has to do with the support for the war on the British side, and by that I mean the people back home in Britain rather than in the colonies. Sure, there were plenty who supported the British Crown in the war against the colonies and making sure they tried to keep them obedient. Some very scathing posters were created, including this one by Jay Barrow of the American rattlesnake, presenting the Americans as dangerous traitors who were cunning and deceitful, like a rattlesnake. But there were also plenty in Britain who were concerned about the economic disadvantages of going to war with the colonies, and they wrote to the king urging him to basically give the American colonists the freedom that they wanted. They didn't want to risk this trading relationship. Their hope was that the Americans would stay friendly if the British pulled back and were less hostile, giving in to their demands. And again, many were absolutely on the side of the aristocracy in Britain, referring to American independence as shocking and unpleasant and most unhappy business. But others, like Thomas Townshend, wrote to the Duke of Portland in 1776, saying that the government and majority have drawn us into a war that in our opinions is unjust in its principle and ruinous in its consequences. As he points out, the majority back home in Britain were very much not on the side of the Americans, but the point really is that there were more voices and differing opinions on both sides of the equation than is perhaps depicted in a simplified version of what happened. Some British printmakers, for example, did sympathize with the American cause, and they would depict Americans as an Indian maiden rather than the rattlesnake, which was a much more generous representation. The next misconception has to do with the reasons that America ever tried to declare independence in the first place. Many are familiar with the reasons that America ever tried to declare independence in the first place. Many are familiar with the no taxation without representation line, but at a guess, most people would point to the Boston Tea Party, originally known as the destruction of the tea in 1773, as the main event that spurred on the rebellion or revolution. Colonists colonists were mad about taxes on tea, specifically that the Tea Act allowed the East India Company to sell tea from China and American colonies without paying taxes. And so they destroyed an entire shipment of tea in protest. However, the American Revolution didn't fully start until the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775. This was a full 2 years later, and before the Boston Tea Party, if we back up a bit, there were other tax revolts against British royal authority and plenty of rumblings within the colonies of what they felt were unjust. This included the lesser-known Pine Tree Riot in 1772, where colonists protested heavy fines against them for harvesting trees. So essentially it was a tree party rather than a tea party. And the final misconception, and the one that does take even me by surprise based on what they teach in American public school, is that the American Revolution did not end in 1776, which is very confusing because you're like, we celebrate the 4th of July in America because it was July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed. And this is what most Americans call Independence Day, which must mean this is when they separated from Britain, right? Generally, this is what most Americans think. We declared it, and so it must be so. But that's wrong. The American Revolution didn't end until 1783 when the Treaty of Paris was signed. In fact, France didn't even enter the American Revolution on the side of the colonists until 1778. And the final land battle wasn't until 1781 in Yorktown. This was years after the Declaration had been signed. But in some ways it does make sense why 1776 is the year Americans consider themselves to have gained independence when you look at it like one internet poster put it. Do you consider the end of your relationship to be when you broke up with your ex or when they stopped calling you? But I suppose the main purpose of this video was to be the one you can send to your American friends when they ask you if Brits care about the American War of Independence or whether you cry into your cornflakes every July 4th. The answer, after 10 years of living in the UK as an American, is definitely they do not. I did know a Brit who once told me they convinced an American that the UK actually skips July 4th on the calendar altogether because it's too sore a subject, which seems far-fetched that somebody would believe that, but sadly is probably true. Now that takes us to the end of this video. I hope you learned something new. As always,
that was actually a very good video. That was a very interesting one. There's some things I noticed. Tax. British still haven't done anything about their taxation. They just keep taxing and taxing. Yeah. Also, I think there's some things that are not going to be taught just because it makes the country look good. And I also think there are some things that will most probably never be changed again. Some things maybe just happened by mistake and they've just been made to stand as the truth. So in this world, there are so many things that we may need to unlearn. I don't know. So many things. And I think one of them will be, different stories about wars, how wars started, who started wars, how they ended. The July 4th one is still valid because that was the day it was signed. That was so I don't think that's a misconception, and I do not think many people really thought, okay, as soon as they signed it, then that would be the end of everything. I do not think they were really, wrong. Just think, at the end of the day, it's just a matter of perspective. Yeah, that's the issue here. Perspectives. Americans would like to see it differently. British people would like to see it differently. But one very important one is, to be honest, I don't think British people care anymore. They don't care anymore. Like, look at the number of places they colonized, and you think they will care. Obviously, America is one big one, but you think they would care about that one when they, they've been everywhere, man. They've been to Africa, they've been to India, they've been to Asia, they've been to the Middle East. Come on. Yeah, I don't think 4th of July is gonna be to British people. No, it's not that deep, I guess. Yeah, that was my reaction to Americans are wrong about the War of Independence from Britain. Let me know what you guys think about what, the comments I made. If I said anything offensive, please do not take any offense. I'm just trying to give my opinion. And till we see you next time, peace out.